Dum-dum, beetle-dum-dum, beetle-dum-dum, beetle-dum-dum. There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and Bert the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and covered, ducked and covered.
He did what we all must learn to do. You
and you
and you
and you, duck and cover.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover. This is an official civil defense film produced in cooperation with the Federal Civil Defense Administration and in consultation with the Safety Commission of the National Education Association.
The Cold War was a period of time after World War II where intense economic, political, military, and ideological rivalry between Communist USSR and the capitalist United States took place. It occurred during the years of 1945 to 1990, and it was termed cold for there was never any direct fighting between the two countries. Instead, they used client states. Mutual distrust between the two countries, this of course caused a global problem. Containment was a strategy used by the Americans to stop communist expansion. It was created by President Harry Truman, and it was a response to a series of attempts for the Soviet Union to increase its communist base in Eastern Europe, China, and Korea. This process came between detente and rollback. The Cold War was known as the Atomic Age. American officials encouraged the development of the atomic weapons. This led to an arms race. The Soviets were the first to test out an atomic bomb of their own. In response, the Americans decided to create an even deadlier bomb, the hydrogen bomb or super bomb. As a result, Americans took necessary precautions such as building bomb shelters in their backyards and practicing attack drills in school. The Red Scare was the promotion of fear of the potential rise of communism or radical leftism. MAD was the mutual assured destruction. It was a doctrine made up of military strategies and a national security policy. It calls for the use of nuclear weapons by two or more opposing sides, in this case the USA versus the USSR. This of course would cause the complete mutual destruction of the attacker and the defender. During the Cold War, both superpowers made great developments in space exploration. The Soviets were the first to launch Sputnik, the first artificial satellite and the first man-made object in space. On top of that, they were able to launch the first man into space. This meant that the Americans came in second place. As a result, President Eisenhower called for the creation of NASA, which was a federal agency dedicated to space exploration. The Americans beat the Soviets by sending Neil Armstrong, the first man, to the moon. Unlike all other incidents of the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis is considered to be an exception to the usual rules of the Cold War. It was the only interaction between the US and the USSR that could have led to a hot war. Young Cubans became very wary of authority in Cuba and decided to protest and were led by Fidel Castro. These people now turned themselves socialists. American President J.F. Kennedy feared the rise of communism only 15 miles from Florida and decided to give his full support to the anti-Castro Cubans. America decided to attack the communists in Cuba at the Bay of Pigs, and this turned out to be a huge failure to the Americans, who eventually denied being a part of it. This pushed Castro into an alliance with Russia. On October 28th, Khrushchev replied to the USA's message and said that he would remove the missiles from Cuba. Within 2 months, they were gone. The Cuban Missile Crisis was over, but it had taken the world to the brink of nuclear war. The end result of the crisis was seen as a huge success for Kennedy, but definitely helped the downfall of Khrushchev in Russia. However, it did create a hotline between Moscow and Washington to allow for easier communication between the two nations' leaders at a time of crisis. The Vietnam War was the longest war in American history and the most unpopular of the 20th century. Even today, many Americans still ask whether the American effort in Vietnam was a sin or simply an idealistic, if failed effort to protect the South Vietnamese from totalitarian government. Vietnam was temporarily divided between an anti-communist South and a communist North. In 1956, South Vietnam, with American backing, refused to hold unification elections. To support the South's government, the United States sent in 2,000 military advisors, a number that grew. From 1968 to 1973, efforts were made to end the conflict through diplomacy. In January 1973, an agreement was finally reached. U.S. forces were withdrawn from Vietnam and U.S. prisoners of war were released. In April 1975, South Vietnam surrendered to the North and Vietnam was reunited.